Chapter 23, Chord Voicing. When we analyze music, we often need to identify Roman numeral as well as the inversion of the chord. A common system for identifying root position and inverted triads are a set of inversion symbols based on what we call figured bass. Figured bass is a chord identification system that counts the distances, the interval distances of all the individual chord tones up from the lowest bass tone. That's important to count those notes up from the lowest bass tone. And when counting these intervals, we're not concerned with the interval qualities, just the basic interval number, as shown here. In this example, we've got a C major triad in root position. And if you count the intervals up from the lowest root tone C to the other chord tone, G, for example, and then to the chord tone E, we get the figured bass symbol designation, which is 5-3. So the designation for a root position triad is 5-3, just the basic intervals of those notes above the root tone. Of course, a root tone position chord can be voiced in many ways, and here's a few options. Each of the triads in this example are in root position and could be labeled with the 5-3 designation. The only criterion for determining whether or not a triad is in root position is that the lowest note, the bass note, must be the root tone of the chord, and the other chord tones can be found anywhere as long as they are somewhere above this root tone. And root tone position chords are extremely prevalent in normal analytical practices, and we don't really bother to apply the 5-3 label all the time. So as a result, if there's no figured bass label provided in a musical analysis, then we're assuming that this is in root position. Now here is a C major triad in first inversion. And we know that it's a C major triad in first inversion because the third of the chord, E, is in the bass voice. Remember, bass means the lowest voice of the chord. Now the figured bass symbol for a first inversion triad is 6-3, because these are the numbers that represent the intervals from the lowest note, in this case E, up to the C, that's the 6, and then E up to the G, that's the 3. As a shorthand, musicians usually just write the number 6, and this is generally understood to mean that the triad is in first inversion. So, as with root position triads, first inversion triads can be voiced in all kinds of ways. Here's a few examples. And in each of these voicings, the triad has been labeled with a 6 to show that it's in first inversion. Now, remember, the only criterion for determining that a triad is in first inversion is that the third of the chord must be the lowest voice in the bass. And those other notes really can be anywhere. They can be voiced anywhere above this lowest third. Here's yet another example, a C triad in second inversion. So you can see with this C triad, the C major triad in second inversion, because the fifth of the chord, the G, is in the bass or the lowest voice. The figured bass symbol for this second inversion is 6-4, because these are the numbers that represent the intervals from the lowest note, G, to the upper voices. So G to E is 6, you can count it up, or G to C is 4. Now with this particular figured bass symbol, the second inversion one, we don't have a shorthand. This is what will be written if it's a second inversion chord. And as with the root position and first inversion triads, the second inversion triads can be voiced in a variety of different ways. Here's a few examples. And as you can see, in each voicing, these triads have been labeled with 6/4 to show that they are in second inversion. And again, the only criterion for determining that a triad is in second inversion is that the fifth of the chord must be the lowest voice in the bass. And as you could see in the example, the other notes of the triad really can be anywhere as long as they are above this lowest fifth. At this point, we should look at an example. So here's a little excerpt from the beginning of Beethoven's Piano Sonata, Opus 109. Now, this piece represents very interesting activation of the harmony through the use of these 16th note broken chord patterns. And since the harmony seems to be changing on every beat, it might be helpful actually to rewrite these chords in quarter note blocks. In other words, take out the activation so that you can analyze it a little bit easier. So take a look at this example. So, the first step here is to rewrite each chord in simplest root position. Remember, that is when you build a chord all in thirds with the notes as close together as they can be. And since this excerpt is in the key of E major, it would be helpful to have a chart of all the triads in the key of E with the Roman numerals labeled. Of course, we're really familiar with the primary chords, the 1, 4, and 5. And this chart shows them and also shows the secondary chords, 2, 3, 6, and 7. And notice that the 2, 3, and 6 chords are written with lowercase Roman numerals, and that's to show that they are minor. But you should also see that the 7 diminished chord is lowercase and written with that little diminished symbol, that little circle, to indicate that it's diminished in quality. Now, all major keys will display this same pattern of triadic qualities. And using the Roman numerals for the key of E from this example, we can go back and label those simplest root position chords that we figured out. We're just matching them up with a chart. Now, take note of the chord with the asterisk because it's got 4 notes. We added a 7 to the Roman numeral here to show that this added note is actually the interval of the 7th above the lowest pitch. Now finally, we can go back to the block chords that we wrote way back in example 23.8 and apply the figured bass symbols along with the Roman numerals to give a complete and detailed harmonic analysis. First, we've got to label the lowest pitch, the bass pitch, as either the root, the 1, the 3, or the 5. Because if the lowest pitch is 1, the root, then we will determine that that is in root position. As we discussed a little bit earlier, we will not have to add any additional figured bass symbol for that, because if we don't add a figured bass symbol, we just assume it's in root position. But if the lowest pitch is the 3rd, then we see that it's in first inversion. We'll add a 6 to the Roman numeral to show this. And if the lowest pitch is the 5th, then we'll add 6/4 to the Roman numeral to show that it is in second inversion. So take a look at this process here. Okay, you can go ahead and check your understanding 23.1, in which you have to take a look at a short piece of music, and you're going to go through this same process that we just went through. First, reducing to the simplest root position, then writing a chart for all of the chords in this key. In this case, it's the key of A, and then going back and labeling the chords not only with the Roman numeral, but also with figured bass symbols where appropriate.